Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'm Abdul Adamu from Data Analytica. In the first part of our lecture on stock valuation, we looked at introduction to stock valuation. After that, the first part of this second part, we looked at one period dividend discount model. If you have not watched that, you can consider clicking this link up here. The second part, we also looked at the multi-period dividend discount model. If you have not watched that, you can click the card here also. In the third part of the second part, we looked at the Gordon growth model. If you have not watched that also, you can consider clicking the card here. And if you want to follow this lecture on the stock valuation, you can go to our YouTube channel to watch all the lecture series on stock valuation. In this part of the lecture, we are going to look at the non-constant growth model. That is, if the growth is not constant. So this, we are going to look at two variants. This lecture will look at the two-stage growth model. That is where there is a growth in the first stage, which is different from the growth in the second stage, and those growths are constant. In this part, we are going to look at the non-constant growth model. This assumes that the growth is not constant. So we are going to look at two variants, the two-stage growth model and the non-constant growth model. This lecture, first part of this 2.4, will address two-stage growth model. The non-constant growth model assumes that firm will temporarily grow at a different rate from its long-term growth rate. A firm that is new, the growth rate initial period will be higher than the growth rate which will come later in the year. For many companies, dividend will not grow at a constant rate. Most firms go through life cycle. Different growth rate during different part of their life cycle. In their early years, most firms grow much faster than the economy. So their growth rate at the earlier stage will be faster, and that growth rate is what we refer to as the supernormal or the non-constant growth rate. Then later they match the growth of the economy, and finally they grow at a slower rate, which may later become a constant or growth rate. To solve the two-stage growth rate, we can do this in two ways. First is by using formula, and this is the formula. The formula to find the value is this. So the first part, you take the dividend at first year, you divide it by the cost of capital minus the first growth rate. The G1 is the first growth rate, while the G2 is the second growth. That is why we say it's two-stage growth. So these are the explanation for the parameter. The G1 and the G2, these are the new things. Is the first growth rate. The G2 is the second growth rate. The second step that can be used to solve it, although we are not going to use it to solve question here, we use it since it's the same thing we use to solve for the second part. That is what we use to solve there. So for that one, you find the present value of each of the dividend during the period of the non-constant growth rate and sum them. Then find the expected stock price at the end of the non-constant growth period using the constant growth model, and discount this price back to the present. Add these two components to find the stock intrinsic value. So let's take an example. Assume that a company paid 3.48 Naira per share as dividend in the previous year, This is our DO, and its earning and dividend are expected to grow at 15% for 6 years. This is our G1, and then 8% indefinitely. This is our G2. If the rate of return is 18%, this is our KE. What is the price of the stock today? Let's bring down the formula. So this is our formula. The parameters are, from the question, this is 3 naira 48 kobo, and the required rate of return or the cost of capital is 18%. If we input this in our formula, that's our G1 times 1 minus 1 plus G1 0.15 all over 1 plus 0.18 raised to power 6 plus 1 plus G1 0.15 1 plus KE 0.18 raised to power 6 times DO 3.48 1 plus G2 0.08 all over this is our G2 KE 0.18 minus 0.08. So we have our value. If we substitute this, we have 133.4 times 0.1432, that is if you substitute this, plus 0.8568 times 37.584. This will give us, this times this will give us 19.10 plus this times this will give us 51.30. Now that is not correct. This times this will give us 32.20. we'll add them. The stock price is now 51 naira 30 kobo. So this is the intrinsic value of the stock. So the solution, using the formula on our Excel, bring the parameter, you multiply them, when you add them, you have 51 naira 20 kobo. Thank you for listening. That is the end of this lecture. If you enjoyed this lecture, kindly subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can like, share, and comment on the content to help us improve on it. If you want to support the channel, you can buy me coffee by clicking on the Buy Me Coffee link below the video. Thank you.